was I've admired Hillary Clinton for a really long time, from the time I first heard of her in 1992, when people were so alarmed at this sort of activist, powerful first lady coming into the office. And I've watched over the past 25 years a narrative being written about her, which I felt was incredibly unfair and inaccurate. And so I wanted to go out and talk about that. Because the Hillary Clinton I'm familiar with is very different than the stereotype, the cliche of this creature that conservatives have sort of put out there in the public. And I feel too many people were kind of going, well, there must be some to all that because people keep saying it. So what I did was I then thought, okay, well, I'm going to talk about this. I better learn what I'm talking about. And I went and did as much homework as I possibly could about Hillary Clinton. And I got increasingly irate when I realized that what the biggest takeaway for me was this is a woman who has been utterly consistent in her commitment to the very same people that she's been fighting for since she was in college. And that's women and children and American families who lack the resources to fight for themselves. Period. That has been her commitment, that has been her life's work, and that has been an unshakable focus for 40 years now. That's who she is, and it's what she's done. And when you look back at speaking of who she was in law school, she was fascinated with what she could do for children. So she spent an extra year in law school working at the Yale Child Study Center to understand the root causes of childhood poverty in this country. When she got out of Yale Law School, she didn't go to work for a high-paying law firm. As we all know, she went to work, with Marian Wright Edelman at the Children's Defense Fund. This is a woman who at that time went down to Alabama as a 24-year-old suburban girl from Chicago, went down to Alabama all by herself undercover to root out, to expose the whites-only schools that were there claiming federal tax exemptions, and posing as the wife of a businessman who had just moved to the community, met with the headmasters of these schools and said, well, I just wanted to know what kind of school you're running here and who is accepted. And they're like, oh, don't worry, ma'am, there's only white kids here. Bingo, she wrote up a report and exposed these schools and not only got their tax exemptions eradicated, but put a lot of these schools out of business. At the same time, she went to South Carolina to expose and change the practice of incarcerating teenage boys with adult male felons. So at that time in South Carolina, the law allowed boys as young as 12 years old to be incarcerated with adult rapists and murderers, some of whom, I heard Hillary say, didn't even have to commit a felony. If a parent went before a judge and said, my child is incorrigible, well, that judge could remand that kid to prison. And so, again, Hillary went in and rooted that out and got those laws changed. This gets to a point that I also want to share with you. In doing this kind of homework, I ran across this article written by a guy named Gary Wills, who is a conservative Catholic historian who wrote this profile of Hillary Clinton in the New York Review of Books in 1992 during the first Clinton campaign. And in that article, he called Hillary Clinton one of the most important scholar activists of the past 2 decades. And I thought that was fascinating for 2 reasons. Number one, I thought scholar activist is such a great way to describe Hillary Clinton, because that's really what she is. She finds a need, she studies it and becomes an absolute expert at it. More importantly, she convenes all of the stakeholders on that issue, regardless of their political persuasion, and listens to all points of view and becomes probably more knowledgeable than any of them about that issue and formulates a plan of action and then sees that plan of action through in order to affect change on that issue. Sometimes, it takes her decades, but she does not give up. And, I think that combination of scholar and activist is such a kind of magic formula for what we need in a president. You know, activism is critically important, and that, again, why I applaud all of you and applaud what seems to be a renewed spirit in our country for activism. And I pray that it continues, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure it doesn't end with the presidential election. But the other part of it is follow through, and not only, sounding the alarm about an issue of concern, but committing to actually creating lasting change. And that is where Hillary Clinton over and over again demonstrates that she's got the goods to get it done. If we look at what she achieved, I mentioned some of her early achievements, that Gary Wills was referring to. But she went on, when she went down to Arkansas following, when she and Bill got together and he was Attorney General, she went into private practice to earn some money for the family, becoming the first female partner at the Rose Law Firm ever in its history. She didn't turn away from public service. She redoubled her efforts and used her increasing leverage to get things done. And she advocated for, poor Arkansas families, for health care for rural women, for, again, really focusing on child poverty and on education. Her husband appointed her to chair the Arkansas Educational Standards Committee, because Arkansas' educational system was in a terrible shape. And she, for example, imported this program from Israel called the Hippie Program, which was a very successful pre-K program in Israel. And she said, Bill, we're bringing this to Arkansas. And he said, okay. It became a big success in Arkansas, and now the Hippie Program is in 41 states around this country. And that's, now it's 30 years later, or more, 40 years later, 35 years later, and it's proliferated around the country, and she gets zero credit for that. But Hillary did that. She founded Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, which does just what it sounds like it does. That is, again, still in existence today, serving hundreds of thousands of families in Arkansas. If we look at what she did when she was First Lady, for which she took tremendous heat trying to get universal health care passed, she failed at that. But what did Hillary do in the face of that defeat? I thought it was an ugly fight. Those of us who are old enough remember how horrible that was. And I thought she was done. I was like, well, she tried, God bless her. She got right back up, analyzed what she had done wrong, what they could do better, and what they could actually salvage in order to create some change. So what did she do? She reached across the aisle, joined hands with Orrin Hatch, who was a conservative Republican, Teddy Kennedy, who's a liberal Democrat, in the Senate, and together they formulated and got past the state children's health insurance program. And to date, S-CHIP insures over 8 million American kids. So again, another example of Hillary creating lasting change. We're starting to hear a lot about that now in the campaign, but she, again, got very little credit for that. And not really that interested in taking credit. I mean, one of the things I think that sometimes works to Hillary's disadvantage is she's predispositioned in her character not to really call attention to herself. She's about the work, and her Methodist upbringing, which I'm going to bastardize the phrase, but the wife is do as much good for as many people as you can for as long as you can, and she lives by that, and that often deflects attention away from herself because she really is about the work. And it's what I heard in an interview on CNN. There was a profile on her last night. It was on CNN, and they were saying, well, what is this thing of people not really being able to relate to you? And she said, I don't do a good enough job communicating to people in a campaign. She said, the truth is, my approval ratings tend to be so much higher when I'm actually doing the job than when I'm seeking the job. And, honestly, I want someone who's going to be doing the job well. She told me a story about when she got into the Senate, in typical scholar activist fashion. She went around and talked to as many people in the Senate as she could, with as many senators that she respected, to see how she could be the best senator that she could be. And one of the people that she went to was Robert Byrd, who was sort of an old warhorse of the Senate. And Senator Byrd sat her down and she said, I just wanted to get any advice that you had. And he said, well, Mrs. Clinton, there are two types of people in the Senate. There are workhorses and show horses. And you need to decide which one, you want to be. And she said, well, Senator, I think I'm a workhorse. And he said, good, that means you'll get something done. And that, in addition to scholar activist, is another great definition for Hillary Clinton. I don't need to go through all, chronologically that she has achieved, but I haven't mentioned what she's done for women. In 94 or 95, when was the World Conference on Women, when she went to Beijing and said human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. That was so much more than a revolutionary speech, than a controversial, provocative thing to say. At that time, as President Clinton said, in those days in China, at that time to say that was a revolutionary statement. But the point is, it wasn't just a statement. She didn't just make a speech. She followed that through and went around the world banging that drum, and it became what was known as the Hillary Doctrine when she became Secretary of State. And a huge part of her agenda as Secretary of State was to go around the world and promote women's rights, in countries where women are institutionally second-class citizens. And Hillary Clinton is a giant hero to women around the world, and for good reason. So